It's a crossover edition of the Locked On Predators podcast. Today we have Seth Toupal from the Locked On Wild. We're going to talk John Hynes' tenure in Minnesota so far, a matchup between two struggling goaltenders, and who's going to win tonight's showdown between the Preds and Wild. All that coming up on today's Locked On Predators.
Your Locked On Predators, your daily podcast on the Nashville Predators. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is happening, everybody? Welcome into a special crossover edition of Locked On Wild and Locked On Predators. We are your team every day. Thank you, as always, for making both Locked On Wild and Locked On Predators your first listen each and every day. Make sure to hit that subscribe button on YouTube so you don't miss out on any new episodes throughout the week. And also follow us on your favorite podcast platforms. Today's episode of Locked On Wild and Locked On Predators is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place a $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started. On today's episode of Locked On Wild and Locked On Predators, we will take a look at where each team is at heading into tonight's matchup, take a look at some players who are absolutely ripping the cover off the puck for the Preds, as well as what's going on with that usually reliable goalie that the Predators bring to battle every night. And we'll also preview tonight's game. My name is Seth Toupal, Daily Minnesota Wild insider and host of Locked On Wilds, joined here today by one half of the dynamic duo that is the Locked On Predators, Nick Morgan joining us. And Nick, Predators in the postseason conversation right now. The Minnesota Wilds are hoping to be. So it's a game that the Wild absolutely desperately need because they seem to be beating Eastern Conference teams and just have not been able to do it against the teams in the West. Although last time these two teams matched up, the Wild just throttled Nashville. I think it was 6-1, but that was the early part of the John Hynes tenure before the injuries set in. And since then, the Predators have a really, really hot stretch, but it seems like they have kind of come back down to earth here a little bit. So what has been going on with the Predators that has led to them going through the bit of a skid here recently?
That's a great question, Seth. And I think a lot of us are still trying to figure it out. It's the Forrest Gump situation going on in Nashville. The team's a box of chocolates and you never quite know what you're going to get out of this team. You'll have a night where you go up, against Colorado or Dallas or one of these big teams and just put forth an amazing effort. And, you're possessing the puck. You're playing, toe to toe with Nathan McKinnon or, Jason Robertson and some of these big stars in the Western Conference. And you're getting wins and wins that look like a legitimate NHL contender would get in those situations. Then you turn around and you have games like Anaheim against Carolina, where you're out of the game by the time the clock runs down in the first period. You give up 3 goals in the first, you give up 4 goals in the first, you have a chance where, finally you score a goal, you build some momentum, and 30 seconds later, the other team scores just on an absolute defensive breakdown to rip that momentum right back. You mentioned Juuse Saros. He has gotten better, but he has kind of had a rough season. There's been games in which, he's had some bad luck. Like, I mentioned the Anaheim game a while back, and, there's pucks, bouncing off 2 defenders in front of him and going in. There's one where, somebody might deflect the puck into their own net. There's one that, somebody might just score an impossible angle goal that goes into this one slight hole that happens to be open. But there's also been games in which just he struggled as well. And it's been frustrating to watch as a fan, because, tonight the Nashville Predators can come out and look like a legitimate playoff team, tonight the Nashville Predators can look and come out like they are going to compete for the number 1 spot in the NHL draft. And I have no idea which one it's going to be.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. We have the exact same thing here with the Wild, in that there are nights where when they put forth a good effort, they could go toe-to-toe against anybody. But then there are other games where it just looks like nobody showed up, and it's crazy. But at least from the Predators' perspective, you think about when Barry Trotz took over, that they were trying to build the team into more of what he wanted to shape it into. So is it safe to say that it's just growing pains for kind of this Barry Trotz roster at this point in the season, or would you hope that those had been taken care of by well past the midway point?
Oh, Andrew Burnett said it best, after I think it was the Anaheim loss. So it was like, I think it wound up being 5-3 was the final score. And somebody asked, and it's like, hey, do you consider this a wake up call for your team? And, Burnett shook his head and said that wake up call should have happened weeks ago. And so it's one of those things where, there are some growing pains. It is taking time, but at the same time, look at this roster. There's Ryan McDonough, there's Roman Josi, there's Filip Forsberg. There's a lot of younger players who did very well last year. They're a little off the pace this year. And so it's like, these guys shouldn't need to go through growing pains. Like, these guys should be able to kind of step up and play A+ hockey every night. And it's not happening for some of these players, and some of these big name players, they'll have a good night and then maybe an off night the next night. So, you want to say like everybody's still figuring out the Andrew Burnett system, but the problem is, like, it looks like you've nailed it on one night, and then the next night there's just no effort in it. And so it's hard to call it growing pains at this point.
Yeah, that's very well put. Let's talk about old friend Gustav Nyquist, who you go through the first 2 months of the season, and he has 3 goals and 16 total points. And so you're kind of like, okay, maybe off to a little bit of a slow start, but you look now and he's got 12 goals, he's got 36 points, and it looks as though he has been on a nice little bit of a heater. What have you seen from Gustav Nyquist as part of the top 6 for the Nashville Predators this season?
For somebody who came in completely overshadowed by the signings of Ryan O'Reilly and somehow the signing of Luke Schenn, there's no expectations, I think, for Gustav Nyquist other than a guy who may provide some good depth. He's completely shattered those. He's been an excellent fit on the first line with Filip Forsberg and Ryan O'Reilly. His speed, this. I know this from, my days watching the Red Wings back in the day. The speed is the first thing that jumps out of you with Nyquist. And, I think he goes toe-to-toe with anybody on the ice. Speed is at the center of the style of play Barry Trotz and Andrew Burnett want to play. And he's got good vision too, and good puck awareness. Like, we sort of joke like the trademark move for Nyquist was skate 100 miles an hour, somehow force an odd man rush, and then just, take a shot right in the center of the goalie's logo. I think that was always kind of the joke with Nyquist. But this year he's shown really good vision. He's really good at setting plays up. In terms of finishing, I think he's really good at getting himself into dangerous areas to finish plays, and get maybe a little bit more of a high danger shot. And the thing that's been most impressive, Seth, and brace yourself for this, he's been good on defense. Right? I mean, when would you anticipate talking about Gustav Nyquist and defense last year in Minnesota?
No. And not to say that the capability to play defense wasn't there. It's just that's like the Wild wanted him to be an offense guy. And he certainly was, with over a point per game since the moment that he took the ice. played great in the postseason, just never got the opportunities that he is getting in Nashville. Just was never elevated into a higher role by Dean Evison, and so obviously went somewhere that was going to afford him more of a top 6 role, and was just taken off. And offense and defense, and we've got now, to be fair, Marcus Johansson has been better as of late, but there was a stretch like 3 months into the season where Johansson had just 1 goal, and you're like, come on. Yeah. Like we're paying a guy, granted it's $2 million, but we're paying a guy to be a top 6 role. And he's got like 6 points in 30 games. What are we doing here? Now, again, he has been better, but still, you could find a way to clear $2 million to be able to keep Nyquist around, and we're not able to do it.
Yeah. Well, the Wild's loss has been our gain for sure this year, because he has certainly been one of the most consistent players on the Nashville Predators this year.
Oh, great. Yeah. That would fit in perfectly with the team that has just been all over the place. So that's just great. Well, we'll shift, and I know you've got some questions about the John Hynes tenure, and then we're going to go head to head, because these teams literally could not be any closer in key statistical areas. And so we'll talk about that to finish the show today too. I just looked at it, and literally like within percentage points in basically every key stat. So we'll take a look at all that as well as we continue today's pregame preview edition of Locked on Wild and Locked on Predators after this. Today's episode of Locked on Wild and Locked on Predators is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. And with the NFL playoffs nearing their conclusion, you can still get in on the action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place a $5 bet. That's $150 in bonus bets, win or lose. FanDuel makes things incredibly easy. All you have to do is head to their Explore tab, where you can find some of the best bets on a nightly basis. You can also find live same-game parlays. One of my favorites to go off of during a game is a second period under or a first period over. And for tonight, if you want to throw a $5 bet on the Minnesota Wild, they're -125 on the money line. Nashville Predators +104. Anytime goal scorer Kirill Kaprizov on another heater is +130 to score a goal at any point in this game. So those are some options for your $5 bet. And whether they hit or not, you will get $150 in bonus bets. So just head to FanDuel.com/lockedon and make your first bet a layup. FanDuel, official partner of the NFL. Welcome back to today's crossover edition of Locked on Wild and Locked on Predators. Once again, we are your team every day. Seth Toupal and Nick Morgan taking a look now at the Minnesota Wild. And so, Nick, I'll turn it over to you. Any questions you have about the Wild?
Yeah.
Go ahead and hit me.
Well, when the last time these two teams played, the big storyline going in was, hey, John Hynes had just been hired by the Minnesota Wild a few days earlier. And it was also John Hynes' return to Nashville. So a nice little cherry on top for the John Hynes storyline there. Since then, you've mentioned John Hynes kind of got off to a hot start, but it's been, kind of trouble in paradise since then. What do you think of John Hynes as a coach in his first month or so at helm of the Wild?
I think he's doing a good job. I'll say that right off the bat. Obviously, the amount of players that have been injured on this roster is something. Just a level of injuries that you really don't see all that often. But at the same time, like, it's a situation where you can't just postpone the games if you have players that are out of the lineup. And so this team really, like, they fought all the way back to be in the second wild card spot with points percentage. And then the injuries started to set in and they just absolutely gave it all away. And you can't do that. And I like some of the things that Hynes does in game. He very much is a tactician. It seems in games, he'll put different line combinations together. He very much operates as, okay, I'm going to play this center for this particular face-off, as opposed to some of the things that we saw Dean Evason do, where he basically just staples his lines together and is like, okay, we're going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. There just wasn't a lot of in-game adjustments, and Hynes has moved lines around. He, I think, got this team just to play more of a modern style of hockey by focusing on the speed. Team speed was a big phrase that we had heard, and it's a team that doesn't have a ton of speed per se. But just going from being like with Dean, it was, we have to slow down our opponents. And so you are forcing them to play at a far slower speed, which means that you're not going to be able to drag a lot of teams to that, which is why there weren't as many wins for this team early on, because let's be honest, how many other teams are trying to do that? Like, I don't know, one or two, the Islanders maybe.
And you're saying John Hynes is the guy fixing this problem?
I think what fixed the problem is the team being like, oh my God, we just got a coach fired. So I think that is a large part of it, but I do think that Hynes he's approached in-game far differently than Dean Evason did when he was here, which is to say Dean really didn't do a ton. So that's been, I think, the biggest difference, is that we're actually seeing some like strategy in games, as opposed to simply, here's what we're going to do tonight. If you beat it, good on you. But then we're just going to go right back to it the next game.
Yeah. It's very interesting you say that, because that seems like the opposite of what John Hynes was in Nashville, which he was very system-based in Nashville to the fault where I think it just became, maybe a little bit stubborn, on him, where there's opportunities to maybe change a few things up, or maybe open up your strategy and kind of adapt to a new way of thinking. And it didn't really happen. And he kind of stayed with, no, we're going to trust the system here. And a part of that was, slowing teams down. The thing with John Hynes is he preaches a lot of physicality. Preds, I think, led the league, or was top 3 in the league in hitting in all the years that the Preds were there. He really did hard focus on, kind of getting the other team's skin. Like we talked about the herd line in Nashville, which was Colton Sissons, Yakov Trenin, and Tanner Jeannot, who's now with the Tampa Bay Lightning. And that was the line that was out there against the other team's number one line, kind of like the grind line from the Red Wings back in the day, or the crash line in New Jersey. Just kind of go out there and get other, under other team's skin. And he never really, it worked. It got some wins, and then you would go up a team like Colorado in the playoffs and get your butt handed to you, because, as my colleague Sean Smith from Penalty Box Radio said, you can't hit what you can't catch.
Yeah, that's funny that you mentioned that, because that has been consistent for the Wild this year, is that they've beaten these teams. They've beaten teams in the Eastern Conference. They've beaten teams below them in the standings, and you kind of get the pat on the back, so to speak. But then it's like they haven't done that against hardly anybody in the Western Conference. Like you haven't done that against Colorado. You've been just destroyed by Dallas in their 3-game series this year. Winnipeg winning both games to end the year. Like it just has not been there against the teams that it has to be. And it's funny, like There's still elements of that, like needing to be physical, that still exists with this Wild team. But it's been something that has been mentioned, I think, almost every post-game presser, is that the team needs to play fast. They need to play with speed. And so John Hynes is learning.
Good. Well, for you and the
Yeah.
Wild fans listening, I'm glad, because that was sort of the biggest frustration is, dude, can we please play a fun style of hockey sometime in the next little bit? The other thing I want to mention is how I think especially the younger players on the Wild have adapted to John Hynes this season, because I think that was the other sticking point in Nashville was maybe some of the younger players Hynes didn't necessarily handle correctly. So when you look at this young Wild team, how have they done, before / after Hynes, and what do you think of that situation?
The two big ones, Marco Rossi and Brock Faber, it seems like Hynes has really made a point of trying to lean on them at times. I mean, Brock Faber had a stretch, and I know it was when Jonas Brodin was out, Jared Spurgeon was out. He had a stretch of, I think, like 6 out of 8 games where he played over 30 minutes and just was he's been elevated to every critical role for this team. He's the number one defenseman on the power play. He is the part of the top pairing on the penalty kill. He's the top pairing defense during games. He plays in overtime. He has been put in every situation to succeed and has stepped up to the plate and has met all of them without any sort of hesitation. And for Rossi, he is centering the top line right now. He is, his numbers speak for themselves. He's second amongst rookies in scoring in the NHL. He is second in goals. And with Connor Bedard missing more and more time, it seems like they adjust those timetables on a daily basis. With him missing more and more time, like, you've got two guys here in Minnesota that are going to be Calder Trophy finalists. I'm gonna go on record and say that right now. They both will be finalists. And it's exciting because this has been a refrain from fans over the last few years, is that this team just is mostly a veteran group. And so to have a couple of rookies hop in and be major contributors is huge. And Hynes has talked about how they are just integral parts of what this team is doing. And so in that aspect, he, I think, has done well with the two rookies. And it doesn't seem like, for the most part, that they have been penalized for mistakes, which was a big staple with Dean Evason, is that if you had like Rossi, for example, if he made a mistake, it seemed like he'd be bumped down a line or two just to try to get it in his head to not do that. Like, it doesn't seem like that has been part of the staple. Now, the one that is frustrating is the situation for rookie defenseman Damon Hunt, who is back down in Iowa. You've got two guys on the roster, and Alex Goligoski and John Merrill, who are, well, not even borderline unplayable, that continue to find their way into the lineup. And so that is one that's frustrating, but I think it's clear that the staff just isn't quite comfortable with Damon Hunt yet in a major role. But on the Rossi and Faber side, like, those two are key pieces for this team this year. And Hynes doesn't seem hesitant to give them critical situations.
Yeah, that's good to hear, because again, it's not necessarily what the case in Nashville was. Just ask current Seattle Kraken star Ellie Tolvanen what he thinks about that. But it's interesting because it just seems like, maybe you're right. Maybe the Wild really or John Hynes really has kind of been able to adjust his game in the Wild so far. And to backtrack to what you said earlier, 100% in on Brock Faber being in the Calder discussion right now. My favorite rookie, I think, across the league this year. With Connor Bedard, certainly is Connor Bedard, and what he's been doing on a bad team is phenomenal. But Brock Faber, I cannot remember a young maybe since Cale Makar, and I'm not sure who before that, a young defender coming in and playing this much of a number one defenseman role on his team as Faber has. So I'm all in on him.
Yeah, he's been just outrageously good. And the thing that I think is exciting is that it seems like the more that gets added to his plate, the better he gets. And he is a guy who never ran a power play in college. And so he's learning that on the fly and is still able to help impact that group. And so people talk about the Kevin Fiala trade, and it may be a win. It probably is a win for the Wild just on Faber alone. But then you also got the other component added in with it. So it's just fun. It's like it's probably about time for me to get a jersey, and it's probably time that it's Brock Faber's.
Yeah.
So
I support that. You could do worse.
Yeah. There are plenty of other options that would not be. I mean, I could go with the John Merrill number 4, and people would probably say, "Why are you throwing your money away?" Yeah. But who knows?
Shout out Brighton, Michigan.
We'll take a look at how these two teams match up head to head, because spoiler alert, they're like identical in pretty much every category. And so we will discuss all of that to finish today's crossover episode of Locked On Wild and Locked On Predators after this.
Today's episode is brought to you by Indeed. Look, it's a new year. A lot of small businesses and companies are looking to add some new team members to their roster this year. And if you're one of them, if you need to hire, you need Indeed. Indeed is your matching and hiring platform with over 350 million global monthly visitors, according to Indeed data, and a matching engine that helps you find quality candidates fast. That allows you to ditch the busy work. Instead, you can use Indeed for scheduling, screening, and messaging your top candidates so you can connect with them faster. And Indeed doesn't just help you hire faster. 93% of employers agree Indeed delivers the highest quality matches compared to other job sites, according to a recent survey. So if you want to join more than 3.5 million businesses worldwide that use Indeed to find great talent fast, listen up. Listeners of the show get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/lockedon. Again, go to Indeed.com/lockedon right now and support our show by saying the Locked On Wild or Locked On Predators sent you. Indeed.com/lockedon. Terms and conditions apply. If you need to hire, you need Indeed.
Final segment of today's special crossover edition of Locked On Wild and Locked On Predators. Once again, we are your team every day, and we thank you for making both Locked On Wild and Locked On Predators your first listen each and every day. Seth Toupal and Nick Morgan finishing things off. And Nick, you would be surprised. No, you're probably not surprised, but listen to this. These two teams, goals for at 3.02. Both teams at exactly the same number so far this season. Power play percentage. Nashville is at 20%. Minnesota is at 20.5. Penalty kill. The Nashville Predators are at 77.5%. The Wild are at 72.8%. So a little bit of a disparity there. Goals against per game. The Nashville Predators are at 3.11. The Wild are at 3.36. So defensively, Predators are a little better, but it's remarkable how close these two teams are in all of these different areas. And yet Nashville is in right now. The Wild are not. And so you would think that this would be a little more even of a matchup than the last time these two teams played, because they're like carbon copies of each other.
Yeah. To me, Seth, tonight comes down to goaltending. It really does. When the teams in front of match, look, we have two goaltenders on either side that, had really good seasons last year that are a little bit, on the struggle bus this year. We talked about UC Saros over on Minnesota. Filip Gustavsson's kind of in the same boat. And, if Marc Andre Fleury is starting, the same can kind of be said for him, both with sub 900 save percentages this year. It seems like, when the teams up front are so evenly matched, let's just go on the assumption that, everything is going to play out like it does on paper. We know it's probably not, but, let's just do it for a second. It's going to come down to which goalie can make more saves in the clutch opportunities to do that. And so for me, you have a goalie in UC Saros, you have two goalies on the Minnesota side in Gustavsson and Fleury, who haven't played their best hockey this season up to the quality we know they're used to playing. Can one of those guys turn things around tonight? Because if the answer is yes, that might be the difference maker.
Yeah, it is funny too how critical it is to attack goalies. I've said this on pretty much every show, it seems. Like, you have to find ways to get to goalies. And even though Saros, even though his numbers are down at this point, they're inconsistent to say the least.
Mm-hmm.
Those veteran guys, if you don't get to them early, they can clamp down. They can clamp down and shut things down. And for this Wild team, 14-3-4, I believe, is their record when they score first. So you score first, you're probably going to win. You don't, and you have to play catch up. And this team, outside of, Kirill Kaprizov and a couple of others, just doesn't have the horses to be able to complete these comeback games. The big key for me in this game, Nick, is you just look at a key stat: penalty minutes on the season. Minnesota Wild are at 551, which is fourth most in the NHL. The Predators are at 465. So we've seen this happen. This is just, it's a Wild team that's not capable of staying out of the box. And it's funny because you would think that if you were a team that was going to go to the penalty box a bunch, that you'd have a good penalty kill. It just has not consistently been throughout the season. Now I think they're 11 for 12 over their last 4 games. So it has been better, but you can't give an opponent additional chances. And look, if there's physicality and there are there are penalties for fighting and such, I don't really count those because you're usually taking one each side.
Right.
But it's those overcompensation penalties, holding, slashing, tripping, you name it, hooking. And the Wild are very prone to those types of plays if they get beat to particular areas on the ice. And so if the Wilds can keep it to a low number, I guess, as opposed to 5 or 6 opportunities, that I think goes in their favor as well, because it's all about usage with that penalty kill. You overexpose them, you're probably going to give up some power play goals.
Yeah, and Nashville's at 20% even, so that's exactly 1 out of every 5. So the more Minnesota puts themselves in the box, Nashville's one of those teams where it may take a couple tries, but if you give them enough opportunities, they're going to break through. It's like very rarely will you see 0 for 5 on the power play on any given night for Nashville. And it's kind of funny you talk about penalties because that was sort of the Preds' undoing last game. Just so many dumb penalties. And when I say dumb, I mean dumb. It's, you talk about the stick holds and stuff like that. I'm talking about, going in the offensive zone and, just absolutely just grabbing somebody, trying to just, clear the puck behind the net. I'm talking about, after the whistle, like there's just some, shoving going on, and all of a sudden you just take a two-hand chop right at an opponent's chest, and, you get a penalty on a situation there. Nashville's been prone to those types of plays. So I'm looking at that. And I'm also looking at, which team's depth is going to be better in this game. We know Minnesota, you guys got Kaprizov over there. You got Marco Rossi over there. In Nashville, that top line is cooking with Forsberg, O'Reilly, Nyquist. But really want to see some people be on those top lines step up. And I think for both teams, that's sometimes been an issue this season. So for me, which one of our depth guys can step up and score a clutch goal or take over a key moment? That's going to be interesting to watch. I think that's a hidden X factor in this game tonight too, Seth.
I like it. Let's finish with a prediction. What do you think we are going to see in tonight's game, Nick?
I think it's going to be close. I think it is going to come down to an empty net play here or there. I got a rep for the hometown team, Seth. 4-2 Nashville is going to be my prediction for this one.
You took my score prediction.
I'm going to guess the teams winning are going to be flipped.
Yeah. Because and I continue to try to straddle the fence on this. Mm-hmm. If the Wilds want to be a team that people say, yeah, they could make a run, and their playoff odds right now are at like 5%. It's just, it's not great, but they're going to continue to push and try to get there, despite my better efforts to suggest it might be time to just kick your feet up. If you want to be a team that's going to get back into this, you have to beat the teams in front of you in the West. And we just haven't seen it consistently this season. And so I think I hope the desperation will be a factor tonight, and that we'll see a Wild team that senses the urgency of the moment, as opposed to just kind of showing up at 8:15 for a 7:00 game.
Yeah.
So I'm going to say 4-2 Minnesota. I think they will do it. I hope they will. But if not, then look, you won 3 games in a row, and you find yourself exactly back to square one for the 50th time this season. And so that's kind of where I'm at with it. If you want us to take you seriously as a team that's going to get back into this picture, you have to beat a team in front of you. It's that simple.
Yeah, I agree 100%. Should be interesting tonight.
Yeah, it'll be fun to see how this matchup unfolds, and we'll have you covered either way. So that's going to do it for today's episode. Again, appreciate everybody tuning in here to either Locked on Wild or Locked on Predators to make us your first listen each and every day. Make sure to hit that like button and that subscribe button before you head out to your next video or to whatever you have the rest of your day. We thank you for taking the time to tune in, and both shows will have you covered throughout the rest of the season as well. You can find new episodes of Locked on Wild and Locked on Predators every Monday through Friday as part of the Locked On Podcast Network.